Hey, welcome back, listeners. I hope you're enjoying the happiest time of the year, and that is all things fall in October. I figured I might open the episode with something on theme for this time of year, and that theme is the whimsical story of Alice in Wonderland. So I'm sure all of you have seen different variations of this electric story of Alice fighting the Red Queen alongside the Mad Hatter to save the world. Emphasis on the word mad. In a world where Alice is exposed to a handful of characters that ultimately play a part in her becoming a hero she never imagined possible. But, see, if we think of ourselves as Alice, how many rabbit holes have we really been in? And when I say rabbit holes, I'm talking about like gateways to these organizations that maybe in the beginning, or who knows, perhaps years into their Agile transformation where everyone is, wait for it, mad. So, do we end up as Alice and thrive to live another day as a fulfilled warrior, or do we end up camping out in a tree like the Cheshire Cat, waiting to greet every poor soul arriving at Wonderland? So, listeners, I welcome you to today's episode, Agilist in Wonderland, a fragile transformation story, with co-host MC and our newest and well-anticipated guest speaker, David Brown. This is Agile Disrupted. Yeah, thanks for that face, David. So I'm going to approach you as a Cheshire Cat, and ask you this question. I brought up in season 2, episode 1, psychology of product. So is it a success story if an Agile team accurately follows an iterative process, creating a product that no one uses?
Well, we talk about in Agile, we talk about collaborating with the customer. And so that's one of the first things that calls out to me in responding to change. But ultimately, we focus a lot on efficiencies. And even we've had this conversation recently about how do we measure effectiveness in a meaningful way to who we're impacting and what we're impacting them with. So I like customer misbehaviors as a sign of at least we have their attention, they have their interaction. I'm sure we talk about this like in relationships. I rather that I say something and it makes you mad than I say something and you completely dismiss me as a human being altogether. Like that's not great. So same thing with products. Last thing I would want to do is put a product out in the world and get nothing back.
Agreed. And it's like a slap in the face. Like you spend all this time doing all this research, engaging, having feedback loops, getting confirmation for assumptions, and then going back to the drawing board. That was a horrible idea. And then you release it and no one uses it. Oh my God. So I feel like Alice went through that in Wonderland too. Like she was in that weird tree hole and then the door just kept getting smaller and smaller and then she couldn't fit outside the door. Yeah, totally. With delivering a product. You're basically stuck in the doorway.
Well, and what kind of looking at the story again and going back and that whole scene where she drinks the potion, she gets too small and she forgot the key and then she eats the thing and she gets too big.
Yep.
That resonated a lot with like experimentation,
Yeah.
beta testers, and they're trying something and it doesn't work and we realize it doesn't work and then they get frustrated and we get frustrated. And ultimately, like how can we find that secret sauce to get them down the hallway to the place we want to get them to? So that's kind of, it's a fun sequencing going on there too.
Yeah. And I feel like we can all relate to Alice because she goes through so many trials and tribulations and then she ends up like kind of being the hero at the end that she wasn't planning on at all. So like she had this, like her curiosity got her into the rabbit hole in a sense. But I think about her and then I think about when teams are following a process. Let's say they got some flexibility in defining the process that they're following. Let's say they didn't. The process was defined for them. So to them, they followed the process that maybe was defined by the organization and they called it a success, but the product ended up getting low user retention. So, I mean, what happens when the org defines the process for you? Is that what you call Agile?
No, absolutely not. And that alone is probably not a bad thing. If the organization says, hey, we like this process, we have a bias towards it because we found value in it over the years. But I think part of the responsibility that comes with whether it's hiring people or forming teams out of collections of people is challenge the process too. Your goal isn't just to challenge and solve problems for end users. And like referencing what you just said, making our customers and our users feel like heroes of their world, like to help them solve their own problems. But it's also challenging us within then. I'd rather my employees be focused on challenging the process than treating themselves as internal competition, fighting for like the next role and promotion and everything else. Like internal competition is a plague in organizations in a lot of ways, except for when they're all focused on the same game, on the same obstacle.
I definitely agree with that. And just that competition that you mentioned, though, definitely exists. And I'm going to say why. So, like, let's say an organization is just transforming for the first time. And what people who used to be program managers and had a high rapport and high influence are now being shoved into a role that they didn't have consent in. And the organization has a different vision in mind, but they have no idea why they're doing the role. So now I remember this story that MC brought up one time. Why is Tabby a scrum master? Why is she on the pedestal? Why am I not on the pedestal? So that happens, and there's this weird competition in Wonderland, and when you don't even know why Wonderland exists, why are you even in this role?
I just have to say, Tabby, I love all the Alice in Wonderland references. 32 years old and I've never seen that movie.
What the fuck? Are you serious?
We've been through this. I had a sheltered upbringing. If it wasn't Ninja Turtles and pizza and football, I didn't really pay attention to it.
Oh my
Typical
God.
sports bro.
I
don't
feel
know.
like you've been exposed to aspects of the stories and all of the other pop culture references you've had, because I can't remember when the story was written. It was like 18 something. So
It's an
it's been
old
around for a
ass
while.
story. Yeah. Like even different cultures have their own interpretations of it. I like the articles that talk about how Alice has this mental disorder. Like she has general anxiety disorder. And then there's this
I've heard
article
about
about all the mental illnesses all the characters have. Yeah. That's why I'm calling organizations Wonderland.
Yeah, I've heard about the acid trip, which most organizations are on acid trips. But you mentioned something though. You mentioned something earlier, Tabby, that I wanted to touch on when you were talking about when organizations kind of decide what their process is going to be, and is that a good or bad thing? I
Yeah.
agree with you, David, in that it's a good thing, but only from the perspective of it should be thought of as your baseline. This is where we start. This is where we are all equal in this way. But from there, do what makes sense for your individual teams, because people are different. The business executives on different different teams are building for or getting funding from are different. They have different needs and wants and desires. So you get from an organizational perspective, right? When you're talking about building an organization, transforming your organization, hiring, firing, right? Career growth, you need that baseline. It's incredibly important for a just solid foundation. But I think organizations, when they go through the transformation or go through the process of I'm going to transform, they miss that everyone doesn't have to be the same. And I think that's just a really big miss, that every team doesn't have to operate the same.
And that's the thing, though, like standardization becomes this reputation of we all have to deploy the same way. But I think that sometimes gets mistranslated to operating models, like the business operating model versus the team's process of delivering perhaps a functionality or even a product within that operating model for that business. And that clear, I guess, boundary does need to be clearly communicated to the rest of the org. What were you going to say, David?
Yeah, I think there's a few misunderstandings there, and one of them is synchronization. And I think a lot of scaled models talk about synchronization across teams. What they
Mm-hmm.
don't do a great job of saying when that's appropriate and when it's not appropriate. And
Yep.
so because of that, it puts this rigor in place that is hard to break or hard to challenge because it's applied across the entire enterprise, perhaps. But to your point, and I think of job descriptions the exact same way. When I write a
Mm-hmm.
job description and I post it and I find a candidate and they're the right person, or I'm excited about them, they're excited, and then we meet. But it is up to you to break that job description of what your responsibilities are based off of your new analysis that you're going to form for the teams that you're supporting. And so
Right.
that's where like performance review is very hard, because at the end of the year, if they're still working towards that job description that's now a year old, like what have you done? What changes have we made? I think a signal that teams potentially are not going through a very good retrospective cycle, and their scope is maybe too narrow to not include the process. It's just
Mm-hmm.
that the process hasn't changed. We did worked with a team recently, and we did a kind of a end of release retrospective, and they asked me to come in to kind of be the guest facilitator. And we did a timeline based approach, and we did experiences off of the people change, off of the process change, and off of like delivery, like goods and bads. And what we saw was a direct correlation for when they stopped challenging the process to where all of the experiences through delivery started getting bad and bad and bad and bad as well.
Yeah, and just kind of unpacking what does a bad delivery mean to an organization? Does it mean predictability? Does it mean consistency? Does it mean quality? Something that I guess a previous consultant told me was that no matter how fast you deliver or what you deliver, your customers just want predictability. They want to know when the next release is going to come because they already, I guess, have a taste of what your product is and they want to know what's next. Something that you mentioned, David, that got me thinking. I kind of want to ask this question to you both. Why do we think executives of an organization decide to start the journey of an agile transformation?
I think that's such a loaded question. I
Mm-hmm.
think I mean bullshit consultant answer. It kind of depends, but I think more often
Yeah.
than not, right? More often than
Mm.
not, it's for one of two things. I actually, you know what? I think it all boils down to security. It's either
Mm.
job security or just the security of where is the company at in terms of competition in the marketplace, and they need to keep up. I think very rarely are organizations forward thinking and recognizing for themselves we're going to have a problem if we continue on with the status quo. So we need to make a change. I think it all just comes down to like it's like protecting the teddy bear, right? I brought that up a few times. They're so scared to let it go, and they eventually say, you know what, I'm going to transform, but I still want to hold that teddy bear.
What's the teddy bear?
The teddy bear is the thing that makes them comfortable, right? The thing that they know, right? So
Ah,
I thought I brought it up before, but when I was with one of the media companies, we brought in a very, very heralded consultant to help us on our journey of transforming and becoming a digital first,
yeah.
newspaper company. And one thing, his thing was teddy bears. Let go of your teddy bears. Let go of the things that make you comfortable, that keep you safe. It's like your security blanket, right?
Mm.
Or the 8-year-old that's still dragging around that dirty, tattered ass blanket because it makes him feel comfortable. We as individuals and companies, they have their own versions of a teddy bear. It's the thing that
Yeah.
makes them feel safe, right? You go to a financial institution, one of the teddy bears over there, right, is co-employment laws. We financial industry got sued in the early 2000s. Now everybody in this space is scared of violating co-employment laws. So they harp on these tendencies and behaviors and rules, right, to not violate it, right? Those are teddy bears. And I think the same thing when you talk about transformations. Why do they go through it? It's a security thing. It's to feel safe, whether it's the manager in their job or somebody in the company is recognizing, oh snap, the other guy down the street that does the same thing as me, he released 2 iterations this year. We got to get faster. And I heard about this agile thing.
Oh my
So let's
God.
do what they're doing so we can keep up.
I
Again,
can't
that's
roll my
just,
eyes hard enough.
that's my opinion.
And you're talking about teddy bears, and I'm just getting more and more repulsed because teddy bears are not clean. Like, like especially when you clench onto them. And you're talking about more teddy bears. So I'm like multiplying the disgust of like unclean teddy bears. But no, it makes sense, like with the metaphor that you were explaining, because it is definitely a security, like a form of security in a sense. But honestly, I think it comes down to money. That's like honestly, like just the return on revenue that your current like model has, your current business model has. Are you staying market competitive? Are you being responsive to market changes? And how can we be, an organization can be as responsive to a market demand as quickly as they possibly can design it for. So I think of that, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like an agile transformation becomes an attempt to save the business because they're realizing they're getting behind in the market without even understanding what their current ecosystem is and what its health is. They see this glamorous process and read about it in a book, and they decide we're going to do the agile thing. Honestly,
I think that's a big aspect of it, but you have to understand that Agile has been commoditized itself. It is a product and a service that is being sold by
it is.
these consultancies. That's how they make money as well. And so
Mm-hmm.
they're going to be the ones that are marketing it. And then the large companies that they've built rapport with over the years are going to say, oh, we want that new thing too, that new product or service that you're offering. And we'd like to know more. But I think the root of it is either the writing's on the wall and they're going to have to change,
Mm-hmm.
or there's some sort of introspection and they say we can do better. And so, taking it towards like more of a coaching's perspective is like try to continuously assume positive intent, and
Yeah.
maybe they just want to change. This is why us as individuals, we sign up for a new gym, or we try a new diet or a new fad that potentially can make us better as human beings, as mothers, fathers, spouses. It's our reasonings for wanting to change as well as individuals, and we want to experiment with a new way. It's just now when you're talking scale, that's so much harder, so much bigger of a change. That's why it's easier for a startup or a growth stage company to go through some sort of transformation than it is for a large corporate enterprise. But
Right.
I can't say for sure. My career has been based off of agile rehabilitations, meaning they failed 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and then I was fortunate enough to be positioned correctly to come in for the fifth or sixth time. I want to assume it's because they know they are going to have to change or they'll be left behind.
And that makes sense because I love that you bring assume positive intent because the people that are, I guess, at a level of small influence within the organization, it kind of feels like they're getting hit hard the most. And there's this tier system of all the executives making these hard decisions for them. And they didn't get a say. They didn't get a say in defining the team structure. They didn't get a say in defining the role structure. And they just have to, I guess, follow the expectations that are given upon them. So they may brand Agile as something completely different. Maybe just a bad experience with the executives within the organization. And maybe they might be transforming for the right reasons or the wrong reasons. We talked about this in the last episode too, that sometimes organizations will transform not with the intention of what the scaling framework is designed for. And they all have different reasons that we've all learned. Something that I will ask you all. So, do we think that an agile transformation is set up for success without doing some work on understanding the current team structure within the org?
I mean, I think it has a little bit to do with it, but I think just to kind of piggyback on like the assume positive intent, I think they should be
Mm-hmm.
thinking forward to what we want to be. You
Yeah.
know, because what I see a lot of in organizations when they're trying to do a transformation, there's so much harping on this is how we do it, this is how we've always done it, this is the tradition, this is XYZ. I mean, yeah, it's important to know what's the phrase, or you got to know where you're coming from to know where you're going, or whatever that Confucia phrasing is. I'm probably butchering it, but
Confucius.
yeah, you gotta have some awareness of where it is, but I don't think it should have a heavy influence. Right. I think the focus should be on what do I want to be? Like, yeah, I know
Yeah.
it's shitty today, and the manager you got sucks. What do we want the manager to be like? And that should be the focus as opposed to like what's happened in the past.
Yeah, I think I agree with the majority of that, MC, and the fact that when we say transformation, going back to the definition of it, it's like it's a thorough or dramatic change in form or appearance or how we act or operate. And it's hard to do that, to say we've truly transformed if we don't know what we're transforming from.
Yep.
But the org structure itself is just one element of a business. And a lot of times it's fallen in naturally or it's been mimicked to be something that we've seen successful in other potentially industries or other companies. I don't know if it's a big deal. Like we talk about agile transformation and executives say, hey, do you know what you're really getting yourselves into? And one thing that's probably not asked enough is what are you willing to do to transform and what are you not willing to do? And I think
Yep.
most of the time, if we were to say, are you willing to change your organization structure? I think the answer is going to be yes, because that's somewhat easy compared to some of the other things that are required to transform.
Yeah. And I know I've repeated this a couple times. Like Les talks about how there isn't role security in a sense when you're scaling towards less, but there is job security because you're in the org and they don't want to lose their talent for the most part if we assume positive intent. So they kind of give you the option, hey, we're about to move in this direction as a program and these are the roles available to you, but I'm going to give you like the option to understand what role you want to take, or do you want to stay as a mentor within the organization as well? Like we're not intending to fire people because we're transforming. We're intending to transform due to these cultural changes and we want you to be a part of it. But again, you have to understand if you're quote unquote ready for that kind of change. But I like the points that you make. Sometimes the team structure may be what it is within the org. Maybe there's not a lot of opportunity to change the team structure, but you're not trying to transform to just adopt a scaling framework. You're transforming for other reasons that might be more related to product. It might be more related to the business. It might just be related to the operating model of the business itself. So I also want to bring up the question of infrastructure. So this is where organizations might transform. Let's say they transform, they flip the switch and they've committed to a specific scaling framework, but the infrastructure doesn't match. Like they want to be able to release on demand, but they don't have the infrastructure for it. There's too many couplings of applications for them to even have the future that they're trying to go towards in rapid release. Have you all experienced that?
Yeah, I personally have several times, and it's another one of those conundrums we find ourselves into, and the fact that we try to go through different business transformations, agile transformations, but not in a very agile way. And so, like,
Mm-hmm.
if you look at like rules around various levels of product management and like the desirability, viability, feasibility of something, that when we're thinking of external customers, will they want this?
Mm-hmm.
Can we give it to them? Does it fit our business model? We can also use that lens for internal changes as well, meaning reorg. When we talk about infrastructure or changes to our infrastructure, we can say, is this feasible? Do we have the skill set in place to reorganize ourselves to enable faster delivery or deployments?
Mm-hmm.
And often I don't think we look at that lens. We just assume because the collection of people that built it there are still around, or a subset of them are, that we can change it too, because change is easy, right?
Totes. Change is totally easy.
I was actually going to harp on that last point. I want to add a little more to it. Is it's one thing to say, do I have the right infrastructure? Do I not? But it's more important to say, am I willing to make those changes and make that investment to get the infrastructure that I want? And I think where the
Mm-hmm.
disconnect can happen a lot is, somebody in the organization drinks the Kool-Aid and says, like you said, Tabby, like continuous delivery, but we don't have the infrastructure to do it.
We
All right, we'll
don't.
figure it out. We'll
Yeah.
figure it out. You can't just say we'll figure it out.
What
What's
does
your
that even mean?
plan?
Figure it
Yeah.
out?
Well, it's like, what is your plan, right?
Yeah.
What is your investment to figure it out? Are you going to allow individual teams to start pushing to production? Or are you going to keep those gates in place and require a database architect to approve all database changes in production? Because
Mm-hmm.
if you have that in place, you will never have continuous delivery. So you've got to be able to make those, right? You can't partially transform, right? And I think that's where the struggle comes in, right? They try to partially
Yeah.
transform to do twice the work in half the time, right? And increase output,
Yes.
but they don't want to trust people. They don't want to, just go harping on the database architect situation. They don't want to loosen up the reins and like truly transform, especially from the infrastructure perspective, because to be frank, you can have the business mindset and have all the plans in place, but if your foundation's not there to allow you to deliver in such a manner, it's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
You're only going to get so much juice out of that squeeze until you legitimately like change the foundation.
And I completely agree, because I remember being in a portfolio at another org, and I don't know, like, I came in way too late to that specific party, but someone made an executive decision to implement SAFe. So scaled agile framework for this portfolio. And I remember, like, I was 1 month in, and I asked them, why did we decide to go that route? Why did we decide to apply that enterprise framework? Like, we still have 15 teams, no, more than 15 teams deploying on the same day in 3 months. And the go live day of when we actually deploy is still a circus. It's still a shit show. And we haven't been able to fix that. Even no matter what enterprise framework you put on top of it, that problem still existed. And I actually talked to a lot of developers with the teams I was supporting in that portfolio. They said the same thing. Tabby, this has been around for decades. They've gone through several quote unquote transformations because they thought that the process would fix the problems for them, but it doesn't. And this is something that is brought up in Kanban too, just even from a granular scale. Like Kanban teams just don't get stood up out of nothing. A process has to exist. Like an actual operating model has to exist. So these enterprise frameworks they exist from an existing operating model within the portfolio. So if you don't do your work to understand the infrastructure problems that you're having, the team structure problems that you're having, or even just the lack of alignment on role structure, it doesn't really go away, in my honest opinion. It stays. And it's, if anything, you're creating more harm for the people that are within that portfolio. What do you all think?
What you're describing is polishing shit and
Pretty
hoping
much.
that it's better. I mean, that's all it is.
I just want to chime in because there's a lot of elements there. And so I think when we started talking about the infrastructure in place and how can we change that to make it better,
Mm-hmm.
it's also like we need to also take a step back, and we could probably, without changing anything to the infrastructure, still move 10% better in delivery
Yeah.
because of you funneling better quality at the front. And so there's needs to be changes on all areas, but we need to be able to quantify what is better to deliver,
Yeah.
incremental change or incremental improvement along the way. I think a lot of times when we look at infrastructure change, we try to change everything in place, and that's
At once.
extremely
Yeah.
hard. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great call out. And just understanding what small steps looks like, but ultimately leading to this abundant future that we're working towards. And that's why I harp on vision many, many times, because in many experiences, executives will come up with this really glamorous vision and it doesn't really resonate to its people at all. It just kind of seems like words in a sense, but a clear description of the future we're trying to work towards. So if we're trying to work towards this abundant future where we're able to build and develop these amazing products and be able to deliver them at our own flexible schedules, if we're working towards that, then that should be clearly defined for us to know what incremental value to that future looks like in small steps.
Yeah, like why do visions have to be word soup and me manifesto says type stuff? Like just say, "Hey y'all, we have an issue with delivering value through our product teams. Our focus for X amount of time or until we deem we need to move on to the next thing is to
Yeah.
better human-centered design. And when we feel like we've met that, then you have your next conversation say, "Hey y'all, we figured out the human-centered design and we're able to deliver the right thing. Now we need to focus on the infrastructure to deliver the right thing faster." Because to your point, David, you can move, that thing incrementally 10, 20, 30% easily. But then how do you sustain it and then how do you scale it? But like I don't understand. I love your comment on vision, Tab, because it's super important. But damn, can we just say what it is that we're doing and get out of the word soup stuff? Because I'm telling you, organizations will do so much better if they're just more clear and direct with what the vision really is, because the developers, the designers, the database guys, the architects, they don't care about the big flowery words. Just tell me what the focus is.
Yeah.
And if you try to make it transform everything all at once, those people are going to be the ones that get pissed off, because they're going to be like, "Well, I thought you said we were going to do things right." When in reality, maybe the focus is only on a certain segment, right? For a short period of time. And it's just like, just be transparent.
And maybe I've gotten a little jaded about it because I've seen so many visions, and I've gone into this habit where I read an executive's vision like 3 or 4 times. I actually went through this like this week with another colleague, and she literally displayed her screen and said, "These are the initiatives right now." And I was looking at it, and I like I squinted my eyes and I'm like, "What?" And she's like, "Exactly." Like she was going through the same frustration I was. And she is this wonderful strategic thinker, and even she was struggling. So that's where it's obviously a problem in translation. And I absolutely agree with you, MC. It's got to be clear, direct enough to understand this is what we're specifically trying to work on right now, what this future we're trying to build. And sometimes, like, I do acknowledge talking about the future is very difficult because our ability to forecast what the future looks like based on the information that we know right now, I mean, that's a forecast. Like we don't know what the future might look like, but that's what we're aiming towards. So there should at least be a goal in mind, in a sense. But what do you think, David?
I mean, Abraham Lincoln, I think he's got one of those famous quotes is if you want to be able to predict the future, then create the future. And I
Yep.
think that's what a vision statement should be. I think it should be your representation of if you could control the elements and everything around it, what would you do?
Yep.
Inspire everybody around you and then go after and get after it. And if you fall short, that's okay, because at least you're falling short the right direction. You're following the right direction. But it is hard. It's hard work. You can be wrong. And in a lot
Yep.
of times, I think product people are scared to create a bad vision more so than not creating one at all. And it's because their personal brand is then attached to it. And I think they need to get out of the way. And the fact that get that out of the way towards let's generate momentum. And then we can clear that up along the way. We can refine a vision. Probably shouldn't refine it every sprint,
Yeah.
but when there's this delicate balance, because if you take a definition of a pivot, it's a change in strategy but not a change in vision. So that then anchors more weight on the vision having to be pretty substantial, like pretty close, pretty clear. And personally, I haven't worked with a lot of great vision statements or videos or whatever it is that align people and inspire them. That the vision should be what gets people out of bed and gets to work early and stays late. But if you don't have that, I think to your point, MC, be very clear on what you're trying to do, what problems you're trying to solve today, And that's
Mm-hmm.
probably good enough to get you to the point when you can articulate a strong vision.
And the thing is, I like how you say it's good enough for today, because for the quote unquote worker bees who are doing the work, that's their focus. For an overwhelming majority of them is today and the very near future. So I want to make sure I'm clear in saying vision statements are cool and good and all, but the today and the very near future needs to be way more crisp and way more clear, especially to the people doing the work, because they're
Yeah.
going to have the most impact in the short term.
Right. And what's ironic about that is I brought this up in the last episode too, where I guess in the lean startup, the way they illustrate the triangle of their understanding of success for most lean startups, like the vision is at the bottom of the triangle. Like it takes up most of the triangle, only because you definitely want to have, like, it's almost easier, like you said, David, like because of the size and the scale of a lean startup, their vision is like almost memorized because it takes up such a good bit of the triangle that they're trying to leverage their strategy and how to reach that future by several products. And it'll never just be one product. It could be several products, but their strategy is constantly being tweaked to reach that one vision that started it all. So that's definitely important too. And just, I guess, the scale of including how it relates to today and then how it relates to the future overall and showing that incremental progress. Something that I want to touch on is strategy. So I know strategy is pretty big once someone picks on, like, oh, we're gonna do the transformation, guys, and it's just gonna happen. What? Like, well, what do you mean it's just going to happen? Like, what's the plan? How are we going to transform? What are the challenges in the organization right now? Are we even ready? Like, like, you got to give me more here. So, what have you all experienced in, I guess, in your career of when an executive decides that we're actually going to go through a big change, but what does that strategy look like from them?
I think I spend the majority of my time trying to form a common definition of what strategy is with the people that I work with,
Mm-hmm.
because I think there's a misalignment on that alone.
Yep.
Meaning, when I say, show me your strategy, they're like, oh, well, we're going to reorg and then we're going to invest into these things. And then, boom, it's like the gnome underpants gnomes from South Park. Like, we know step one and we know
Yeah.
step three, how we're going to create value, but the strategy is step two. And what is it? And so they
Yeah.
don't realize how detrimental it is to be able to articulate what good and bad is along the path, to then
Mm-hmm.
create a strategy that is flexible enough to flex with the results along the way, the tactics that have to be influenced. And
Yep.
so I think that is one of the hindrances of, or one of the components of why so many agile transformations fail, is because people that are put in place to drive strategy probably don't have a great foundation of what strategy actually is.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And just, I like that you bring up the plan that goes behind a strategy. Like when you ask someone what your strategy is, it's almost like you're trying to understand what challenges have you identified that has resulted the strategy, not just what your plan is. Anyone can come up with a plan, I'm sorry, but whether the plan is actually applicable to the challenges that the organization is going through, really, does that plan even matter? So that ties into the story that I shared previously around the portfolio that was in a safe enterprise framework, but they didn't have a strategy. They were hoping the framework would solve all their problems, and the same problem still existed. So that's why I know the conversations I've had recently around strategy is that sometimes a strategy sounds really negative because it kind of lists out and shows all your, I guess, your laundry in a sense as an organization. But I think even a poor strategy could be just having a blind positive attitude, like in a sense, almost ignoring the challenges that exist in an org. But what do you all think?
Yes, that absolutely is a great example of a poor strategy, and one that's commonly executed as one, it's not realistic. Two, it
Yep.
doesn't take in consideration what our true obstacles are and what our strengths are as an organization, in our business and our products and our services that we provide. The moment you scratch towards something, you don't actually find any real depth there. The strategy is almost too dependent on dependencies. How are you going to
Yeah.
get there? Oh, well, we're going to hire a consultancy and they're going to come in and then we'll be transformed.
Oh my God, I hate that so much. Like that they're the holder of the strategy. How long have they been with the company? Like 5 fucking minutes? Like
But it's our
seriously?
strategy. We just need
Oh
them.
my God. No.
They just need them
I
to tell
hate
us how
that
to
so
do it.
much. Okay, I'm going to dig deeper into that. So let's say the consultants get here, they show us their potential strategy. They have this glorious understanding of the org model and the structure. they get here and then they provide a potential solution. They do all this data analysis. They come up with a solution that makes sense to them based on their expertise, their experience, and their training and skill sets around enterprise frameworks. What happens when the executives and let's say the whole executive team sees this and it's like, we want a second opinion. We actually don't believe you.
I mean, it's not
Like,
it's
what?
not informed.
Yeah.
It's I've used this phrase before. It's dry spaghetti, right? They're throwing it at the wall and hoping it sticks, right?
But they
And
did
it's
so much
because
work. That's what they're being paid for.
they didn't really do that much work. They kind of copy and pasted what they delivered to the other company. But
Okay.
it needs to be informed, though. And this is why I think, right, if you go out and you bring in a consultancy to tell you what to do, like to tactically tell you what to do, you're setting yourself up for failure, because no one is more informed about your company, the inner workings of your company, and what has tried and failed, and the culture and the belief system than you are. So bring
Yeah.
those consultants in to help you think differently and to guide you along the way. But the plan should be yours, and it
Mhm.
should be informed and driven upon by you and your knowledge. But these organizations that just, hey, McKinsey, come tell us what to do, right? They, and not to pick on McKinsey at all, but just to, if you, anybody, come tell me what to do. I don't know what to do. Help me do twice the work in half the time. They're setting themselves up for someone like David Brown to come in 2 years later and fix their problems, because apparently that's what David likes to do. He just likes to clean up other people's messes.
I mean, really, are we branding him right now, MC?
David, I have a mess in my office. Do you want to clean that one up?
Wow,
Yeah, as long
what a
as you
dick
tried to
move.
clean it 4 times before I did.
What if I put a
Oh my
Kanban
God.
board on the wall and break down the process of how I cleaned my room? Would you come then?
Wow.
So
Okay.
the way you phrase that means you don't have a Kanban board in your room today, which
I'm
that's
going to
kind of
mediate
upsetting.
right now. No. We're not having this fight on this podcast right now. No, I agree with you, MC. Like, we don't even know if, let's be real here, we don't even know if the consultant is competent. They may have their own agenda and just be providing a service. But I want to harp on the fact that we're kind of like this with our own doctors in a sense. Some of us, maybe not all of us. We don't feel well. We go to the doctor. They give us shitty news, like really, really bad news, like we have cancer. And we just don't flat out believe them. Like they've done all these tests and it's been like a collaborative effort. And we just don't believe them. We want a second opinion. They've been our doctor for 15 years and we don't believe them. So I think of that metaphor with this. Like, let's say the consultant has worked with the organization for years and they've been working collaboratively with the executive team day in and day out. They've put in their blood, sweat, and tears and to really uncover like the impediments, the delays, and the roadblocks that exist within the operating model. But then they come up like, it's like this light bulb hits, but then they look at the solution like, no, we want a second opinion. We don't believe you. What?
I like the analogy there from if you put the spin of like functional medicine in it as well, because if we were to compare consultants to doctors and we come in and we have a problem and they say, oh, okay, I see what your problem, we've recognized it, take this medicine, and it kind of masks the issue, opposed to if we went to someone and they were like, well, let's dig into the root cause to this. And a lot of times I want to believe the majority of the times consultants don't do well is because the company that hired them did not do the due diligence needed for them to be successful. I've worked with a lot of consultancies, and the people, the individuals that make up those consultancies are very bright. They really know their things. They see these patterns across multiple industries, organizations, and they have the ability to influence real change. But going back to Agile Transformation, when it's ran from the inside or outside, what are you willing to do with the information when you receive it? And if you are given the information that you're going to have to let go of some of the people that you care about as human beings, like your best friend, even if they're executives or senior managers, whatever they are, they're in your way. Are you willing to let them go? No. We'll reorg around that. We'll mask that. We'll take the medicine. We'll say we're doing a reorg, but we're not going to correct the root problem. I mean, there's so many examples of theirs where this has existed, and companies have buried themselves because they're not willing to do what it takes to survive, and not even for the right reasons. Like if it was, I don't want to let go of people because I care about my people. That's pretty good. Like, glad you have that principle. Glad you have your values in place for that. That's pretty good. But if you go out of business, they all lose their job either way.
Blockbuster. Just saying, people. I immediately think of Blockbuster. Like, what would have happened if they were open to a streaming service? Honestly, like, Netflix was around when Blockbuster was around, but we're not gonna look over any of our people.
Blockbuster had a streaming service before Netflix.
Really?
Yes, it's just like Kodak was a year before digital cameras came out. They were the ones that created it internally before anybody else. And then several years later, they're filing bankruptcy because they didn't want to be the one that took it to the market because it would have disrupted their own business model. Blockbuster had this ability, yeah. But to your question about what would happen if they were still around, nobody would know what Bent, Oregon was probably, which is where the last Blockbuster is. So
I forgot there's still one more. Yeah, I forgot there's
still one more left.
Yeah. So I was laughing earlier. I saw your face, Tabby, when you started talking about the doctor stuff.
Yeah.
Two things come to mind. One regarding the consultant that says, "Here, take this medicine." Right? You have the folks that are like that, but then you have like on the other side, right, where you go and, "Hey, doc, it hurts when I do this." Then don't do that. Like you're not fixing my problem. You're just telling me to do something else. So you have the consultants that come in and say, no, don't do that. Just do this. Do safe. Do this. Do that.
Follow the process. It'll fix all your problems.
But I really like the doctor metaphor and the analogy, because 99% of the time, you especially go to your primary, they're treating the symptom. They're not treating the causation, right? And that's where. So I had a foot injury years ago when I was working out, and I went to like 3 different doctors, and the first 2 that I went to, they're like, oh, just wear these shoes and do that. And I was like, but why? Why do I need to wear those shoes? You're not telling me what I'm doing wrong. Am I running wrong? Is my gait wrong? Am my heels striking? Like, what am I doing wrong? And then I finally went to like the oldest doctor, because, a typical millennial, I want to go to a doctor who's my age. I go to an older guy, right, in a crappy rundown building, and he goes, well, what shoes do you work out in? Oh, I don't have them. Well, pull it up on your phone. Let's look at your shoes. Take off your sock. I want to see your arches. Like, he asked so many questions, and I was legitimately frustrated. But by the end of it, he says, okay, you've got plantar fasciitis. We can do a test to confirm it, but you've got plantar, and it's because your heels are shaped this way, and the shoes that you're showing me are shaped that way, and that causes this problem. So what you need to do, and he gave me the same answer as the other doctors, but he didn't tell me why. And I think that's where a lot of consultants will find success in helping that message click to the executive they're talking to. Don't just say, here, take this medicine, it'll solve your problem. Say, here, take this medicine and go look at these other things over here. Are you eating the right foods? Are you exercising properly? Are you yelling at people all the time and driving your blood pressure up? Maybe we need to look at some lifestyle changes, right? And from the organization perspective, just your belief system and how your organization operates. And then this medicine might help you, or maybe you need a different medicine once you've evaluated all those other things.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I want to double back and double down on the fact that I think the reason that the corporations or companies, anybody hiring the consultancy, never get that from the consultancy isn't because the consultancy is holding back. Because they want those, that's part of their business model. Word of mouth marketing fits them too. If they completely transform a company, that's going to generate more business for them in the future. And so, but I think what happens is when the consultancy say, why do you do this movement with your arm that hurts you so much? The company's like, that's internal. Well, we can discuss that. So they're not given the root cause. They don't have the ability to go in and dig deeper and then start to recommend changes down to the core of the business a lot of times.
Exactly. And I think I mentioned this earlier too. Like, it's very possible that the executives, they don't understand the current ecosystem. They have been so far out of the weeds for such a long period of time. They kept getting promoted. They're not in the weeds anymore with the teams. They really couldn't answer that question. So when they get asked that by a consultant, they actually have to either go do their research or maybe lie and start making decisions for teams, and just these harmful consequences happen when that occurs. So that's definitely a great call out. And sometimes, consultants, if we think about it, they are providing a service. They have their own project plan, if you think about it, and they have their own boundary of, okay, this is the time where we exit the client and move on to the next client. We did everything in our project plan.
I want to jump in there, Tabby, because that's a very important part. Like, depending on the type of transformation you need to do, is the consultancy operate the same way. So if you
Yeah.
found a consultancy that was really good at product delivery, I bet at the end of their contract that they built with you, they're not going to feed you a 40-page Excel document that's unreadable, right? It's going to be something that's potentially consumable, something that's actionable, something that you can take forward and say, oh, okay, this makes sense. Or maybe they co-created it with you.
Yeah.
But I've seen where consultancies were hired, and at the end of their tenure, at the end of their SOW or whatever it was put in place for them to do some work, they say,
Yep.
oh, here's your deliverable. Check in the box. We did what you asked us to do. We're done.
Exactly. And just
Yeah.
that's a consulting culture that I think we overlook sometimes, despite the scale of the service that they're providing, whether it's an agile transformation or whether it's just services to help an organization have a discovery, or despite like what the SOW is. But what were you going to say, MC?
Well, I was going to say, and this is where, any person who's involved in vetting consultants or whatever, listen to this, talk to those consultants and ask them what is their business model, because
Yes.
you have the places that say, all right, we came in, we told you, we trained you, blah, 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 blah. Here's your deliverable.
Provide a service.
Yeah. Here's your plan to transform. See you later. Right. I worked at a consultancy a couple years ago, and I love their business model because it was, all right, cool. Here's the 2 or 3 ways that we operate. You, business, how do you want us to work with you? Do you want staff aug? We can do that. Do you want us to come in and tell you what to do and get out of the way? We can do that as well. Do you want us to come in, tell you what to do, and then stay on and help you deliver that and help train your people and help you change your people to deliver that? Because and that last example there, that's where we found the most success, because we would leave clients, right? A large financial client in Charlotte that actually just went public this week, or just filed their IPO this week. When I left and my team was rolling off, they were like, Michael, please no. How can we keep you? Because not what you're delivering is great, which it is. You're helping our people get better, and we don't know how to replace that. And that's the difference in the different consulting groups out there. So if you're talking and trying to figure out who can I bring in to help, understand you will be more successful if they help you get better, not just tell you what to do.
100%.
Agreed. I mean, sometimes we just have to acknowledge the bias that some executives might have. I mean, you have to make a lot of hard decisions as an executive. If you're fundamentally transforming an org that has worked for a long period of time based on these principles, based on these values, based on these processes for a long period of time, you have to be transparent with your people. And I mean, honestly, I'm just going to call this shit out. Some executives just want to avoid making hard decisions. They want to avoid making hard decisions. They want to avoid the accountability. They want to hire a service, have them take the blame for it and go through the pain points, and then just kick them out. They served their service. And the thing is, that's also very disheartening too, because how much harm did you create for your organization by doing that?
Yeah, going back to assume positive intent, there's nothing more damaging to a career for an executive to make the wrong decision. And so until you change the entire structure to say, hey, we care more about that you're going out there, you're putting yourself out there, you're really trying to do good work, then you make the perfect decision every single time. Like that's internal culture that has to change to be able to allow for that. We say fail fast. We don't mean that.
But are we okay with it? Like
at every level? No. The teams can fail fast. The executives cannot. So, I mean, those people, they're top of their career potentially. They have families established potentially, or expensive hobbies, something. But they, just like everyone else in the company, they don't want to lose their job for a decision. So that's part of the transformation.
Exactly. And strategy will help with that. Just want to put that in there. But I'll ask one more question, though, because we do have to wrap up. So I want to touch on maturity. You talked about culture, David. When it comes to maturity, I think we assume, like, we kind of give ourselves assessments, like we're a mature agile environment. We have all these matrices that define our agile maturity, but I want to bring the human aspect of it. So if you have a child and you want them to mature at a time frame that fits your schedule, like you want to fast forward that maturity and then just assess them and like on your time scale, does that actually happen? Like, can you really fast forward a child's development to like 24 because it's on your schedule? Or do you allow the child to make independent decisions and actually fail and grow from those decisions, and allow them to mature at their own timeline? So what do you all think?
I'm laughing because I don't know why, but I went to Big Daddy and the little kid, and it's like, but I wipe my own ass. It's like, all right, you're 6 months.
Yes.
I need you to like speed it up here and learn to wipe your own ass.
Exactly. Make your own food. Go drive the car. Like, just be an adult. Thanks.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't that be applied to organizations? Go ahead.
I think there are ways to hack maturity, to almost compound interest, but compound maturity in ways.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, if more of your touch points in your day to day are more complex than they used to be, you are probably going to grow faster. So, if you create an environment that is supportive of maturing and growing faster, then you'll probably get more out of that than if you don't. But
Mm-hmm.
you're right into the fact that you can't take 9 women and try to have a baby in 1 month. That just doesn't work that way.
Nah.
But you have to allow natural things to happen naturally.
Yep.
The scrum master stepping into the space for the first time, they're like, oh, I can't get hired. I have my certification, but they're looking for experience. Go get experience. You don't need a job to do
Right.
that.
How does
There are
experience come?
nonprofits. There you can go work with your local community. You can create this role in your hobby time. You do not have to be employed by a Fortune 50 to get hired as a scrum master necessarily, or to say that you have experience in this realm. I say the same thing for organizations. You don't have to
Yeah.
go through massive reorg to start to understand what it is to influence changes in the organization. So that way, when
Mm-hmm.
you are ready for organizational transformation, you have a little bit of experience doing it at a scale.
Exactly. It's an environment that you create that's fertile enough to handle mistakes. And like it's fertile enough to handle wins too. And sometimes when you join a new org, you kind of ask like all your coworkers, like your manager is going to say everything's like rainbows and daisies for the most part, but your coworkers are going to tell you, hey, I like fucked up like 2 weeks ago, and it was fine. Like we had a conversation and like we actually learned from it. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So this seems like an environment that is okay with making mistakes, and it's in a transformation because transformation doesn't really stop. So it's an environment that's open to making mistakes, and you're not going to get fired because it's kind of like the whole reference of like if your child messes up, it's like, okay, you're going to adoption. Like like you don't want that to happen. So when you make a mistake in an organization that is transforming, you basically like test the waters, like what are the consequences of me making a mistake and what's going to happen to me in this transfer? Do I have safety in this org that's transforming?
I'm loving that.
You don't have to wait until the thing has occurred to then say, hey, am I going to get fired? But you can say, hey, I'm thinking about doing something that's a little bit risky. I think
Yep.
we can, this is the test in place. I did this a lot in my military career when we were looking at promotions for people that we just didn't know if they were ready
Mm-hmm.
for that promotion. And that promotion meant that they were going to be in charge of several other people. And so you just have open, transparent communication saying, hey, we think this person's ready for this change, but this person needs support. We can't just put them in him or her in this situation and just watch. We need to craft an environment to help this person take charge and everything else that they didn't have because of the type of job they had previous. Even the people that person is leading, I'd have a conversation with them too, saying, hey, this is your peer today. They're going to be your leader tomorrow, and they're going to need your support. Are you willing to do that? Because when it's your turn, we're going to make sure you have the same support too. You create a safe environment for someone to fail. You can do that
Exactly.
all the time.
Exactly. And that's what we should be preaching to executives as well. And assuming positive intent that they are setting up that kind of environment. But essentially, like, can your people fail when this transformation happens? Because they're going to. Like, transformations are going to be painful. We're not going to get it right in the first pancake. The first pancake is typically burnt. So after a couple of pancakes, like, we may reach a rhythm
Not
where
my
we're
house.
actually. Really? Okay.
Sorry, I don't burn pancakes in my house.
Always the first three, because I put three in a pan. Always the first
it's
three
my
are
fourth pancake. But
undercooked
anyway,
or burnt.
before you all derailed me,
Sorry.
an executive needs to be aware of that because they're not going to be able to expect perfection from their people when they are trying to transform together as an org.
The C-suite, not one executive, the entire C-suite needs to be aligned to that.
Entire C-suite, yeah.
I was going to say, but here's how you can flip it on its head, right? As an individual, I'm interviewing at an organization. Let me ask them, when's the last time you messed up at this company? What did you mess up at, and how did the company handle it? Because that will tell you as the person coming in, what's the culture like here? Can I mess up, right? Do I have the ability to grow and mature if I push the envelope? Because I know for me, right? I mean, I did it this week. I needed to have a difficult conversation. Spoke to like 3 or 4 different people about it, right? To get some perspective to help me approach the conversation the right way. But I was very selective in who I picked out because those were the people that have the growth mindset, that have the, oh, okay, MC might F up here. let me give him a little advice to help steer the conversation in the right direction, because it's you got to navigate the waters, right? The treacherous waters of the organization that you're in. So I
Yeah.
think it would be really interesting if people flip that on their head, right? You always get through the interview process and you ask them, what questions do you have for us? And it's all the questions are about the role that they're
Yep.
going to do. But it would be really interesting for someone to ask me a question in an interview. When's the last time you fucked up at work, and how did you get in trouble, or
It
did
should
you?
be built into the interview process, MC. It's very important that probably before you're even interviewing them, you need to give them the space to interview you, because they're hiring you as their next employer. And I think it's
Hmm.
extremely important. And I may go a little bit on a rant here, but it
Oh
comes with the
boy.
talent pool and the fact that, like, so a lot of my time is management consultant internally for the organization that I work for. And the most expensive and riskiest low performer is at the management level. If they have the ability to hire and fire and they're not good at what they do, being a people manager, get them out of
Mm.
your way, because they're the ones that will completely degrade any work you're putting towards going into creating a culture and then a very safe environment for people to experiment, to try new things, to be bold, to push the limits, which are all the things that come with innovation, all the things that come with business transformation.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's 2021. Like, what's the average expectancy at a job now? Like 2 years, if that, right? And if you
Yeah.
have that manager who's in the way, you're not going to keep your best talent. People are going to
Nope.
look at you and be like, "Nah, I'm good. Like, I can go find another gig right down the street who might pay me more, or might give me a better work environment, or might give me better perks, but I'm not going to have to put up with that BS day in and day out." And I think that's where like the internal management consultancy really comes into play, because if you've got people in place that aren't effective at the job, or aren't willing to change, or don't recognize I need to change, right, to
Yep.
keep my talent here, you can have a problem. You can
Exactly.
derail, you can undo your transformation.
Agreed. Especially if you, I mean, hiring, I guess, the bad apples in addition to a basket of good apples. So it only takes one. So I think about that. And I think every person in an org, not even just the executives, the C suite, every person in an org wants to be able to measure progress in a way that their work that they're doing is actually incrementally getting better. So that's why I kind of feel jaded about these agile maturity assessments. Who cares about the process? The process is subjective to the org. I would measure culture. Has the culture actually gotten better because we made this decision to disrupt the operating model, to disrupt the cultures that was once an organization that has now completely changed? Because, I mean, the Agile Manifesto is branded as these principles that we follow and not just a prescribed checklist. So if it's the principles that we follow, the principles affect the people of an organization, and the people follow these principles to create a collective culture within the organization. So again, are we measuring processes? Are we measuring output? Are we measuring the culture that we disrupted and completely revolutionized with this change that we made in this agile transformation?
I'm going to go out and say this and be pretty bold in the fact that I may piss off some of your listeners, and I do not apologize. I love measuring. I love the ability to measure things in a unique way. And
Yeah.
if whether it's systematic or local, whatever it is, but agile maturity models are one of the worst anti-patterns we see out there today. And if you are the one that's trying to roll this out as a best practice in your organization, you probably need to look in a mirror.
Yep.
Yeah, because
Agreed.
it's team specific, right? I was at a large bank a few years ago, and all of my teams were scoring red when they did their surveys. And when we
Mhm.
got called in front of the firing squad, why are you guys so bad? And I'm like, well, your maturity model survey has 70% of the questions don't apply to us, and I don't have the ability to skip those questions because they don't apply to us, so my score goes down. Like,
Yeah.
you created the environment for us to fail. And the
Yep.
funny thing is, as we all know, right, financial institutions are driven by bonuses and stuff. Like, you screwed your own bonus by not listening to us when we told you your survey was shit.
Yeah.
It kills me. But I don't. I like the measurement, David. I think I'm kind of in the middle. I think if you do go for a maturity model, because you need to be able to gauge your team and their maturity and their change and their health over time, but it's for that team. It's not a best practice for the entire organization. That team needs to have a way to check themselves, not have the organization assess them and tell them, are they good, are they bad, are they improving or not. It should be more of an internal thing.
That I still disagree with that in a lot of ways. And it's only because looked at so many of these different maturity assessments, and one of them could be like co-location, and then they tried to put some empirical number aligned to it. Say if 1 is bad, 5 is good. But if you look at co-location, what are you really trying to measure? You don't take out a measuring stick and measure the distance between someone and then rate that, do you? What you're trying to measure is, do these team members have the ability to communicate when wanted or needed to solve a problem? So what you're not trying to measure is co-location. What you're trying to measure is communication. Do they have the ability to communicate appropriately? And so you're measuring interactions, but the nomenclature was wrong, how you measure it is wrong, and then the score that you put next to it is wrong. I don't know how that's good for any organization. And I can go down the list, and I've done it. I've gone down every single row and column inside of these maturity assessments, and they're not good. And if you pick up the book Accelerate, anybody that's listening, pick up this book Accelerate. It's built off of the DevOps report from 2014 to talk about capabilities, not maturity, and why that could be better to look at measurements. And what it talks about is, there's no mature done, all right? You don't say someone's mature when they hit 65, because we see maturity before that. And then if you meet any 65-year person or older in my family, they're not mature at all. So age isn't a determination. Output versus outcomes. A lot of your maturity models only measure output. Did I deliver this thing? It doesn't matter the effectiveness of that. So it's missed again. It hardly ever looks at the customer and their experience, and hardly ever looks at the tech stack. So not only is it different from team to team, it's different based off of the problem they're trying to solve, the person they're interacting with, and their experience they're trying to create. So there are too many variables in place for any of these maturity models to make sense to me today. Anybody out there, if you have something that you want to challenge me with, bring it to me. I'll look at it with brand new eyes. I bet I'm not going to like it, though.
I'll bring it to the podcast. In fact, like, now that both of you have gone on this tangent on measuring what matters, and yes, I'm referencing the book, we're going to have a podcast episode on it. Like, you've inspired me.
Does that mean I have to read the book? I don't like reading, Tabby.
I'm going to make you read the book. You're reading the book. Dang. But with that note, we do sadly have to wrap up today's phenomenal episode. So I want to take a moment to show gratitude to David Brown for joining today's episode.
Thank you so much for having me. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, it was such a fun time, David. Thanks for joining us. For all you listeners out there, also, thanks for listening to today's episode, Agilist in Wonderland, a fragile transformation story. Stay tuned for the next episode coming up, Agile Disrupted.